Yitzi, the end of Sefer Bereshit, there's one more thing about Yosef we have to understand.
What is that?
Parshat Vayechi, the end of Sefer Bereshit, and in the past few weeks we've been talking a lot about Yosef because really he is the main character, the main story in these last few Parashot of Sefer Bereshit. And even more specifically, if you look at Parshat Vayechi itself, you see that it's really all about Yosef. There is the brachot to all the Shvatim by Yaakov, but really it's all surrounding around Yosef. First, Yaakov giving special brachas to Yosef's two sons, and Yaakov saying that they will be like his own first two sons, and Yosef himself getting the bracha that Yaakov got from Yitzchak, Yaakov passing that bracha on to Yosef. And then after Yaakov dies, you see how Yosef is the main figure, all the brothers are around him, and really Sefer Bereshit ends with Yosef dying and Yosef being the main figure of Am Yisrael dying. We don't hear about the brothers, we don't hear about the Shvatim dying, we only hear about Yosef, that he even saw his great-grandchildren. And the big question about this is, what happened to Yosef's figure in our tradition, in our history, in our nation? We know we have three Avot, we have three forefathers that established our nation, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and we have four imahot, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. And when you look at the Psukim, specifically in Parashat Vayechi, you see how Yosef is the continuation of Yaakov. Yaakov says that himself, giving Yosef the bracha that he got from his father, saying that Ephraim and Menashe will be like Reuven and Shimon. And also after Yaakov dies, again, when the Torah emphasizes Yosef as the figure of Am Yisrael, and really Sefer Bereshit, Sefer HaYashar, which is named after the Avot, ends with Yosef's death, with Yosef's burial, and Yosef's ending, and by that sealing that first chapter in Am Yisrael's history. And the question is, why isn't Yosef considered one of our Avot? Why isn't he in the same list with Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Yosef? And if you would want to say, well, that's because we are not all descendants from Yosef, unlike Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, well, look at the mothers, look at the imahot, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. Two of the mothers, Zilpah and Bilhah, aren't even mentioned. We call Rachel Imenu, we all refer to her as Rachel Imenu, even though today most of us are not descendants of Rachel because most of us are from either Shevet Levi or Shevet Yehuda, but not necessarily from Shevet Binyamin or Ephraim and Menashe. And yet we call Rachel Imenu, again, even though today most of us are not descendants of Rachel, we still refer to her as Rachel Imenu. So why is it that Yosef doesn't get that place on that list of being one of the founding fathers of our nation, which obviously when looking at the Pshat of the Psukim, he deserves to be in that list of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov?
Well, actually, to be honest, he's not on any list because he's not on the Shvatim either. It's Ephraim and Menashe there. So he's sort of just stuck in the middle here, and he really sort of disappeared. He's not one of the Avot, he's not one of the Shvatim. Then, what happened to him? But I think that there are actually two parts to this answer. First of all, if we look at the story of Yosef from the beginning, from when he comes into the world and the relationship and the dynamics between Yosef and Yaakov, I think we could say that Yosef and Yaakov are almost like two parts of one whole. Chazal say this, that when Yosef was born, only then could Yaakov truly come and meet Esav. And we discussed the role of Yaakov of being able to now deal with Esav, to deal with this world, to deal with the physical world. But Chazal teach us that only once Yosef came into the world was Yaakov able to actually do this. So Yaakov's role in the world was not able to be accomplished without Yosef. And they base this on the pasuk, V'haya Beit Yaakov Esh, Ubeit Yosef Lehava, Ubeit Esav Lakash. So Yaakov is the fire and Yosef is the flame, and only together can they deal with Esav. Now, that's very interesting because a fire without a flame doesn't really mean anything. What is a fire without a flame? A fire has flame. How can you separate the two? But I think what Chazal are saying, that the pasuk is telling us that you can separate the two. In a certain sense, Yaakov was only able to fulfill his role in the world through Yosef. And therefore, you don't separate Yosef and Yaakov. And therefore, as Yaakov says himself, your kids are part of my kids. So we have Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Ephraim and Menashe are part of that list because me and you, in a certain sense, are together in this. And I think we see this also in the choice of when the Torah calls Yaakov Yisrael. Almost every single interaction related to Yosef, whether Yaakov knows it's related to Yosef or even when he doesn't know and he's sending his kids back to Mitzrayim to go meet Yosef. But anytime there's this interaction which is driving this story with Yosef forward, the name Yisrael is used. And I think Yisrael, which as we discussed represents represents Yaakov's larger role. Yaakov's role not just as an individual, as a father, but as the father of Am Yisrael, is the one who's able to deal with Kisarita im Elokim b'im Anashim, with the spiritual world and with the physical world. That name, Yaakov, is especially called when it has to do with Yosef, because Yosef is what enables Yaakov to be Yisrael. Together with Yosef, Yaakov is able to achieve that Yisrael. And maybe that's the first reason why he's not on the list. But actually, Yosef is on a list, not on the forefathers, not on the Shvatim. But we have another list called Shiv'at HaRo'im, and there Yosef is on that list. But interestingly, he's not there in order. It's not Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yosef. We have them as the Ushpizin on Sukkot, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, and Aaron, and only then Yosef and David. Yosef shows up at the end. He's not there with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And I think this is another part of it, because if Yosef together with Yaakov create Yisrael, Yosef is not one of the forefathers, maybe because the forefathers are about the foundations of Am Yisrael. And Yosef is not about the foundation, it's about the future of Am Yisrael. Yosef is together with David. We know there's a concept of Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. Yosef is part of what makes Am Yisrael, because he helps us connect between our past, the forefathers, and the future. Yosef is the one that doesn't leave us in Mitzrayim. Yaakov is sent back to Eretz Yisrael, he's buried there, but Yosef, who really wants to go back to Eretz Yisrael, stays there with us till the last minute. His bones are taken with Am Yisrael when they leave Mitzrayim. He stays with us. He's the one who holds our hand through the Galut. He's the one who helps us survive that Galut, survive Mitzrayim, and come back to Eretz Yisrael. And also Mashiach ben Yosef represents that, the one who brings that first physical redemption, who brings us back after all the years and rebuilds Am Yisrael. That physical Yeshua, which is expressed with Yosef, that's Yosef's role. Yosef's role is not about the past, one of the forefathers. He's actually not Mashiach ben David, which is all about the future. He's about tying the two together. We've mentioned several times about Yaakov being the one who founded Tfilat Arvit, the davening of the nighttime. He's the one who enables us to survive through the darkness. But how does he do that? He does that through Yosef. Yosef is the one who's actually there with us. And maybe this is what Yaakov says to Yosef in the bracha at the end of the Parsha, Ro'eh Even Yisrael. He is the shepherd of the rock of Israel, in the sense that he's there to help us really deal with the challenges of this world. He's the one who's able to go down into the darkness. He's the one who stays with us through that darkness and allows us to climb out of it, and later becomes the platform, the rock upon which the next stage of Mashiach ben David will be created. So Yosef is not about the past. He's not about the future. He's the link between the past and the end of times. He's the link from our forefathers through the darkness, through the challenging times, and is the platform upon which the future will be built.
That's very nice. And like you're saying, Yosef is called by Yaakov Ro'eh Even Yisrael, and you were just saying he is the link from the past to the future and what is happening today. And Rashi and Unkelus on the words Evan actually translated as Av Ben, as being a father but also a son, meaning he is really that link. He is the Kodkod Nazir Echav. He's the one that's a little bit separated from the brothers because he's like a Nazir, but he's also the Kodkod. He is the one that everything touches, everything gets to, and everything goes through. He's the point that all the lines go through and continue from that point onwards. And looking at the brachas that Yaakov gives the sons, really not all of them have this aspect of achim, of brotherhood in their bracha. Only to a few specific shvatim does Yaakov refer and use this concept of brotherhood. And going back to what we've discussed in the past few weeks, this idea of brotherhood is something that's very important to Yaakov. When he gets to Haran, he doesn't even know the people there. He refers to them as brothers, achai, and also he refers to his own sons as achim when they build the matzeva with Lavan just before leaving off from Haran into Eretz Yisrael, and especially with Yosef when he sends him off to go see your brothers, go make peace with your brothers. This idea of brotherhood is very important to Yaakov, and he uses this concept of brotherhood with only several of the shvatim, and you can see how in each time he uses it, it's a little bit different, because in the beginning he says that Shimon veLevi achim. He calls Shimon and Levi, you are the brothers of each other, and we know this from other places in Sefer Bereshit. When it refers to ha'achim, we always look at them as Shimon and Levi because they were always together, but this was not in a good reference. This was a bad thing, that they were always plotting things together and doing things which Yaakov didn't approve of. But right after Shimon and Levi, in the bracha to Yehuda, he says, Yehuda, ata yoducha achicha. Finally, there's one brother brother, well, all the brothers around him will admit to that brother, will acknowledge that brother, will look at that brother as being their leader and follow his footsteps. And that is Yehuda's role. And later on with Yosef, like I was saying, he is always there by his brothers in order to be that point where everything goes through. He's that dot where all the lines intersect and connect to and go through. And therefore, looking at Yehuda being the one that all the brothers look up to, and Yosef being the one that all the brothers go through, these two figures, these two names, like you were saying, are what lead Am Yisrael into the future, are Mashiach ben David and Mashiach ben Yosef, these two concepts of the Geulah, of the redemption. And there's a very, very famous speech that Rav Kook gave back in July 1904, right after Herzl died, a speech which then later got printed out and is called HaMisped B'Yerushalayim, the eulogy in Yerushalayim, which in that speech, Rav Kook talks about these two aspects of Am Yisrael, the aspect of Mashiach ben Yosef, the aspect in Mashiach ben David. And it's a very long piece and a very fundamental and important piece, especially for our times today, for understanding the way we live our life today. But just in a nutshell, to understand these two concepts, Rav Kook says, just like a body has a guf and an neshama, you have your body and you have your soul, and a good soul needs a good body, and it cannot live without a good body. The same thing, Am Yisrael has these two aspects. It has the aspect of the spiritual, of the ruchani, of the holiness, of the kedusha, which is led by Yehuda, which is the leader, which is the one pulling us, which leads Am Yisrael. And then you have also the body, the materialistic life, the strong, healthy, materialistic life, which is needed in order to give place for that holiness, have a place from which it can grow, have a place to rest in which it can be. And says Rav Kook, these two aspects of Am Yisrael is what's needed in order to build the nation. And going back to Eretz Yisrael at the time, over 100 years ago, remembering the battle in which Rav Kook found himself in the middle, trying to gap these two worlds. And Baruch Hashem, today we can see that everything he said back then has really come true and was kind of a prophecy that has gotten fulfilled. But maybe this is exactly why Sefer Bereshit ends the way it ends, because this is Yosef's job. As we were saying for the past few weeks, Yosef's job is to be that person who can handle the galut, who can handle the materialistic world, who can handle this world which pulls you down all the time, and yet you have to pull yourself up towards the holiness. That's our job today, to remember these two concepts of the guf and the neshama, the body and the soul, the Ben Yosef and Ben David, and bring them together in order to bring us closer to the redemption.
Yeah, beautiful. And Rav Kook also mentions there the Haftarah that we read last week about Etz Ephraim and Etz Yehuda coming together. Etz Ephraim is Etz Yosef, is the tree of Yosef, and Etz Yehuda, the tree of Yehuda. And we know the history, how in Shlomo HaMelech's time, we were all together, but then after it, Rechavam, his child, the descendant of Yehuda, is one. And then Yoravam, the descendant of Ephraim, the descendant of Yosef, splits off with a lot of Am Yisrael. And we know the history. This continues for many, many, many years later, where we have Yosef and Yehuda. We have Ephraim and all the 10 Shvatim, and we have Yehuda. This big and long civil war, civil battle, which basically never actually ended. We never completed. And what the Haftarah is talking about is how they come together. But interestingly, the description is how Etz Yehuda is being placed upon, is being grafted on Etz Ephraim. And as we know, when you graft a tree, the idea is we have a tree that has strong roots and is rooted in the ground, and you graft a weak tree upon it so it'll get the strength from the tree below. What you're actually looking for is the fruit of the tree on top, but you realize that it can't grow without the roots and the strength of the tree below. And we see here again that Yosef, Mashiach ben Yosef, that represents this materialistic side upon which Mashiach ben David is placed, is not only just the strong body, it's the strong body which is rooted in the ground. And that's what we see here in the Parsha. Our confusion of whether he's a forefather or he's a Mashiach is exactly that. He's that platform that gets its strength because it's deeply rooted, because it's not shaken up by the challenges of this world, because it's here within this world and still rooted in the past, connected to Yaakov, connected to the forefathers. And it's this strong platform upon which Yehuda can be placed, and the two can come together and bring about the full Geulah and the full redemption.
Beautiful. And it really, there's so much more to talk about, especially again, that piece from Rav Kook. He refers to the Gemara we learned this week in the Daf Yomi, where it talks about the misped on Achav and Yeshayahu, the two sides of Ben Yosef and Ben David, but we're out of time, so we'll have to stop here. But if you're interested, make sure you look it up, because it is a very fundamental piece to learn, a very important one. And we'll just remind our viewers what we discussed last year. Last year, we discussed the famous switching of the hands by Yaakov when he places his right hand on Ephraim, the younger one, and his left hand on Menashe, the older one. Why is that so important for Yaakov? What goes on over over there between him and Yosef, because Yosef keeps on reminding Yaakov that Menashe is the older one, as if he's not understanding that Yaakov has other intentions. We'll link that video right now, and as usual, if you enjoyed this video, please like it, comment below, share it with your friends, and of course, if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. Shkoyach Yitzi.
Shkoyach, Tuvia, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, and we'll talk again next week, Bezrat Hashem. For more Talking Torah videos on different topics, check out our YouTube channel.